Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be talking about adding custom collision to your 3D models inside of Unity. It doesn't really matter which version of Unity you're using, but just to be safe we are using Unity version 4.3 in this example. So when it comes to collision, there's quite a few different ways to do it, but the main thing you need to realize is that collision is meant for two things. One is so that items can collide with it, which also means that the programming is going to do something based on the collision. But the collision also needs to be optimized. The reason why we're doing this is because if you have for example, a 50,000 polygon tree in your level, it might look awesome. But you don't really need to collide with all 50,000 polygons. You know, in a video game, it doesn't really matter if a bullet flies through the branches. You know, it doesn't matter if a bird is flying through it, because things like that happen so fast and you're not paying attention to them that it doesn't really matter. But for something like the player, if the player walks through the trunk of a tree, it's weird, right? But a player never really touches the tops or the canopies or the leaves of a tree. So again, instead of a 50,000 polygon tree collision, all we really need is like a cube collision on the trunk of the tree. You know, something as few polygons as 6 for a cube is all you really need. You know, maybe you want a cylinder that's 8 or 10 polygons, but that's it. You don't really need all 50,000 polygons slowing down your processing and rendering and causing lag. Those other 50,000 polygons could be used on something else, like another tree or a vehicle or who knows what. So again, in this video, we're going to be talking about 3 different ways to add collision to an object inside of Unity 4.3. So you'll see here that I have all these elements, all these 3D models that are in my scene that I could have downloaded, or maybe my 3D artist did it, whatever it may be. And when I drag it into the scene, I realize that, wait a minute, there's no collision on this model. So my player is going to walk right through it. He's not going to be able to stand on the bridge and, run into the poles here. So, the first thing you do is freak out because, there's no collision. And but then you have to take a minute and figure out, okay, well, what's the most optimized way that I can create collision for this guy or this object, right? So in Unity 4.3, the first option is to just add a component. So we're going to click the Add Component button and go to Physics, because collision is physics-based, and we can look at these options. So number one is I could do a box collider, which will put a box around everything. I could do a sphere collider that creates a sphere, a capsule, a wheel, all these weird things. I could even do a mesh collider, which basically means what 3D model do I want to use as a collider. And we'll get to that in a second, but let's start with box collider. So if I click on Box Collider, you can see here that that is not going to work. Okay? If I'm the player and I'm colliding with the box, I'm going to stand on this green line. I'm never going to actually touch this the base of this bridge. So there's an issue. But what I could do is I could come over here to our inspector and I can lower it. I can lower that box. And it's always good to use your orthographic views, your 90-degree views, because then you can see exactly how high and how low these boxes are. So I can see real quick that I could add this just where it is, and now the player can walk on it, and it's going to look like he's walking on the bridge. The problem is this big collision down below might intersect or collide with something else that might mess it up. So what I could do is I could adjust the size of this object and make it as close as possible. So now instead of using 20,000 polygons to make this really awesome collision, I could just use 6 polygons for this little cube, put it exactly where I need to, and now I have a bridge that the player can walk on. But you're probably thinking, well, what if he walks into these little poles, right? Again, you can just add another component. Again, we're going to go Physics and Box Collider. And in this case, we're going to have to move it in a different direction. So I'm going to put the center of it where I need it to be. I'm going to scale it down a little bit. I'm just clicking and dragging on these letters. And I'm just going to keep moving it to where it needs to be. I can even scale it down some if I want. Let's see, put that back. I mean, I could be as exact as I want, but when it comes to collision, you want to be exact as much as possible. Now, let's say that I like the one that I've done here and I want to copy it. I can click on this little gear and I can say copy component. Then I can paste component as new to give me an extra one. So then all I have to do is just adjust the location of it and put it where it needs to go. So now I've got a completely custom 18 polygon, 3 cubes times 6, right? 18 polygon custom collision on this model that has like 2,000 polygons on it. So instead of a 4,000 poly model where 2,000 polys are collision, I only have 18 polygons. Okay? So that's one method. And again, it took 3 cubes. Okay? So right now I'm going to just delete these components so that we can show you option number 2. So that is kind of limited, that type of collision, because I have to click and drag on all of these little numbers here. So what else could I do? Well, we have our view here. I can go to Game Object and I can actually create those cubes as separate objects. So I'm just going to create the cube, and then I can use my tools to move it, scale it, rotate it, do whatever I need to do, get it the shape that I need it to be. And it's not going to be perfect here. This is just to show you how to do it. Okay, so I've got one there, and then I can go to Edit, and I can say Duplicate, and I can move that over, make another one. And then, again, I can go Game Object, create another cube, and scale that to where it needs to be. Okay, so now I have my other collision, right? So I can grab these guys, each box, and in the inspector I can turn off the mesh renderer so that you don't see it. But you'll notice they all have a box collider already set. So before we added the box collider elements to the inspector, now we're creating our own custom models. And I need to go back here and add a tab. I need to add I believe it is the hierarchy. Yes. So you'll see that in our hierarchy we now have the bridge itself and these 3 cubes. I'm going to delete the main camera because we don't need that here. So I have the bridge and I have the 3 cubes as collision. So what I could do is I could focus on the bridge to get that XYZ location and go Game Object, Create Empty. And so this is basically just an empty group. I'm going to call that bridge. And then I can take all of these other ones and add them to that element by just dragging them in. So now I have this bridge element, or a 3D model, or whatever you want to call it, that has all the collision in it and has the bridge as well. Okay, so that's option number 2. Okay, so let me delete all of these. Okay, so now we're back to our bridge, and I focused on it here to get that XYZ location. What I could do is I could go back to Add Component. This is option number 3, and under Physics, I could add the Mesh Collider. And again, what the Mesh Collider is going to do is it's going to let you pick the 3D model that you want to use as the collider for this. So in this example, I could go into the Mesh Collider in the inspector under Mesh and pick the mesh I want to use. And I could just find that bridge, double click, and now the bridge is acting as a collider to collide with whatever it may be. Now again, if this bridge is 2,000 polygons, you don't really want to use 2,000 polygons to do this. So how could you make your own custom collision with polygons? Well, to do that, you have to export this model or import it into Maya. And then you make it and re-import it. So let's go to Maya real quick. You'll see that in Maya or 3D Max or Lightwave or whatever 3D modeling software you're using, you can import a 3D model. It's an FBX model. And you can see here that I've turned on these statistics here to see how many polygons we actually have. You'll notice the number of faces on this object here is basically 1,192 polygons or faces, or tries, depending on what you want to call them. So 1,100, and we're going to use 18 to do the collision. So in Maya, to get these stats, you can go up to Display, Heads-Up Display, and click on Poly Count. Again, that's Display, Heads-Up Display, Poly Count to show these numbers of whatever is selected. Okay? So the first number is in the entire scene. The second number is going to be what you've selected. Okay? So 1,192. Now don't get scared if you don't know how to use Maya. We're going to walk you through it. You can see that there's a tab up here that says polygons on it. So we're going to be creating our own polygons. And we saw in Unity that we need cubes for this specific example. So in Maya, you're just going to click on this little cube button. And then somewhere in your scene, it doesn't matter where, you're going to click and drag to get the shape of the cube. Then you're going to click and drag to get the height of the cube itself. And then you can move it with the move tool, you can rotate with the rotate tool, and you can scale with the scale tool just by clicking on these over here. Now if clicking and dragging really freaks you out and you really have a hard time understanding that, you can go up to Create, and since we're doing polygons, you can go Create Polygon, and if you clicked on Cube, you would still have to drag it. But if you come down here to Interactive Creation and you turn that off, turn off Interactive Creation, when you click on the button, it's going to create that object for you at a scale of 1, 1, and 1 over here in your channel editor. So we have a scale of 1, 1, and 1 here, which is all we really need, right? Just click and move it. So to get out of the solid view here, the one view, we're going to hit the space bar, which takes us to our other views. And you can hit F to focus, just like in Unity. And what we're going to do is we're just going to move and scale all these boxes, just like we would in Unity. We're going to make it the way that we want, so that it's only 18 polygons. Only 18 polygons, and we're going to get it the way that we need it to be. Okay, then we can go edit, and we should be able to duplicate it just like in Unity. And then we're going to create another cube, focus on it, and then we're going to scale that, make it where we need it. Okay, so now that we have these three things, we can hold Shift and select them. Not that one, this one. So all three of those, right? And we can go up to Mesh Combine. And what Mesh Combine is going to do is make it one 3D model. Okay, so now that we have made this, we've combined this one object here, there's a couple of things we need to do before we actually export it. First off, if you look to the right, you'll see that there's these inputs here. These inputs are basically history. Things that Maya basically remembers all the steps that you've done, and we don't necessarily want those steps in this model. We want the model to be clean without all this extra metadata and weird stuff going on. So to get rid of that, we can just select our object and go up to Edit, Delete by Type, and do History. Edit, Delete by Type, History. And it'll get rid of all that stuff we don't need. Also, when we export this, we're going to give the entire file a name, like Bridge Collision. But inside Unity, it doesn't necessarily look for the file itself. It looks for the model in the file. So for example, the file would be called, Bridge Collision.fbx, but then inside the file is this 3D model, which is currently called, in the channel box here, currently called Polysurface 1. So we're going to have no clue what that's called in Unity. We're going to forget the name of it, right? So let's do this. Let's call this Bridge Collision B. Bridge Collision B. And then what we'll do is we'll name this file Bridge Collision A. There we go. So this is Bridge Collision B, the model itself, and we've deleted all the history, right? So now we're going to select it and say File, Export Selected, and we're going to call this one Bridge Collision A. That way we can see the difference inside of Unity. And then we're just going to export it back to the same folder. So hit export. Now something to keep in mind, I've got both models in this file, right? So I could select them both and export them at the same time, and Unity will understand that they are separate models. Okay, so you could do that. But since the bridge is already in Unity, I'm just going to export the collision. So let's go back to Unity, and let's refresh. Just right-click and refresh to make sure everything's in there. And you can see right here, when we click on this, this object, we have Bridge Collision A in the inspector here. So under Model, we need to set the scale factor back to 1. It's just something that Unity wants us to do. And since there's no animation, under Rig, we're going to set the animation type to None. Okay. So let's open this guy up by hitting the little arrow. You can see that the Bridge Collision A is pretty much the entire file, all the import information when you imported it. But the Bridge Collision B is the model itself. Okay, so let's go back to our bridge here that does not have collision, but it has a mesh collider, and let's find that mesh. So again, we're going to be looking for Bridge Collision B, not A. So let's see if we can find it. So there's that, right? Bridge Collision B, and we're just going to double click. So now Bridge Collision B is the mesh collider, and if you look at this, you can see that the collider is there, and it fits perfectly, and it's only 18 polygons. We could have optimized this and made it even less polygons. We could have just made a U shape with 3 polygons. But in this example, we want to show you how to make custom collision using cubes and whatnot. So it's up to you to be as creative as you want with your collision. So there you go.